Good morning, everybody. We're back. I hope you all got those stretches in. Good. So now that we have several takeaways and implementation strategies to let us continue obtaining knowledge and build upon our skills, we have our keynote speaker, Alan Mallach. Mr. Mallach holds a BA degree from Yale College, is a senior fellow with the Center of Community Progress in Washington, D.C., and the author of The Divided City: Poverty and Prosperity in Urban America, which offers strategies to foster great equality and opportunity. Currently, Mr. Mallach is now co-authoring his second book entitled The Good Neighborhood, which will explore the roles of neighborhoods in the 21st century America. Also, an interesting tidbit about Mr. Mallach, he is an accomplished pianist and has written 2 books on the 19th and 20th century Italian opera. Also today with Mr. Mallach is our moderator, Alex Koenig with the City of Rowlett, Planning and Urban Design. Thank you, Alex. If you want to take it away.
All right, thank you, Tara, for that. And welcome back to everyone who has been in their breakout sessions this morning. Again, we hope you found those to be good and educational. For those of you that might just be joining us, this will be new to you, this information about our participant etiquette. So we will have a question and answer session after Mr. Mallach finishes his discussion, his presentation. So please hold those questions until that last 10-minute period to allow us to stay on schedule so that we can then move into our breakout rooms after this presentation. If your question is not answered, there will be the speaker's email will be available so you can ask those questions directly. Also, during the Q&A period, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen. We will be on the lookout for those raised hands and try to call on you in order of you being the time you raise your hands. With the chat function, please do limit your chat activity to the speaker questions and avoid commentary in there so that we can see those questions that are in there so we can find those as quickly as we possible. Also, that chat will be saved in the transcript, so be very careful about what you might post in there. Also, again, make sure we don't say anything disruptive during the presentation here. We will remove those who might become disruptive from that. With that, again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our speaker, Mr. Mallach, and I will turn it over to him.
Well, thanks, Alex. And let me see if I can share my screen here, pull up my presentation. Here we go, almost. There we go. So I'm delighted to be here virtually. I would have much preferred to have been here in person in Rowlett for this event because I've never been to this part of the country before. And I would have loved to have seen it and gotten a feeling for the communities. I've tried to make up a little bit for that by going to Rowlett, Garland, and Plano on Google Earth, but I know it's not the same thing. So hopefully sometime in the future, I'll be able to actually come and visit in person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about neighborhoods generally, about suburban neighborhoods, and then specifically about the different roles that people can play to make neighborhoods stronger and why that's important. And again, I'm really interested in hearing your questions. So as Alex said, make sure you put them in and don't wait for the last 10 minutes. So neighborhoods go back a long way. You know, interestingly, in ancient Rome, there were distinct neighborhoods with neighborhood names. Each neighborhood had a neighborhood center and a shrine and a temple that was dedicated to that particular god that was the neighborhood's patron god. You actually see this sometimes in some modern neighborhoods in Europe where the central theme is a church, for example. So, but the idea that neighborhoods matter goes back a long, long way. And one thing, we tend to think about neighborhoods as an urban thing sometimes. We don't really think that much about suburban neighborhoods. And obviously, You know, a lot of us come from urban backgrounds originally, or our parents or our grandparents did, where the neighborhood was kind of almost the be all and end all of people's lives. People did not have Facebook, did not have internet, didn't travel as much. A lot of neighborhoods were defined by ethnicity. You know, you had Polish neighborhoods, Italian neighborhoods, Jewish neighborhoods, and so forth. So yes, neighborhoods are very much part of the American urban experience, but they're not just part of the urban experience, because neighborhoods are just as real and just as important in the suburbs where most Americans today live. And why that matters, why that's important, is because neighborhoods are basically social entities, and neighborhoods are where social capital develops. And I like to amplify on that a little bit, because here's a kind of a basic definition of what a neighborhood means as a social entity. I mean, they're the middle ground between formal local governments, which are meaningful, but are a very different kind of animal, and the close relationships that people have with their family and friends. And sociologists have come up with a very important distinction in terms of different types of social capital. And this is particularly important in terms of neighborhoods. They distinguish between bonding capital and bridging capital. Bonding capital is the social capital that people develop among their family members, hopefully, and among their friends. And these are close ties, and they tend to be exclusive, and they tend to exclude the outside world. Bridging capital is, and is sometimes called weak ties, as distinct from strong ties. These are the ties that people develop that sort of lubricate the everyday life and make their larger relationships with the world function. And sometimes this is called neighboring. It's the informal relationships that people develop with people who they may not see them every day. They may not share their innermost thoughts with them, but they become part of their larger network. And that's where the neighborhood is really critical. It's that network that people can relate to beyond their immediate bonding capital of friends and families. And that's the central role of a neighborhood, is to further that and as I say, enhance people's identity as members of a community. And I'll come back to that, but there's some very concrete things we also know about neighborhoods. So, for example, neighborhood affects people's life expectancy. If this map shows the Dallas, not the whole Dallas area, but a significant chunk of the Dallas metro area. And the rough location of Garland, Plano, and Rowlett is in the red oval line up here. What you can see is even within the Dallas area, there are some neighborhoods where the average life expectancy is only 64 years, and somewhere it's 85 years. And if we look at the three community, the area where the three cities are located, you can see there's a lot of variation from one part of the neighborhood, one part of one city to the next. And this has to do with the conditions of neighborhoods. Now, it can have to do with a lot of different factors, including individual factors, environmental factors, social factors, and so forth. But basically, neighborhood, where you live, affects your life expectancy very dramatically. Where you live also affects very dramatically how much wealth you can build. If we're looking at the Dallas area, I mean, the value of houses. In some parts of the area, houses are worth less than $100,000. In others, they're worth over $500,000 and rising. So again, this is obviously, there are differences between it. There are small houses, there are large houses, there are very elaborate houses, very plain houses. But ultimately, you know, as realtors say, you have I suspect everybody on this call has heard the expression, what are the three most important factors in real estate? Location, location, location. And ultimately, it's about the neighborhood. So neighborhoods really matter. Now, in suburban neighborhoods, clearly, in the suburbs, you typically do not have ethnic neighborhoods. You do not have neighborhoods that kind of wrap around a church or a factory. But there are some important things that distinguish neighborhoods. The first thing is boundaries. I mean, neighborhoods are made distinct by their boundaries. You know, some neighborhoods, you'll have a major artery that separates them from the next neighborhoods. In other cases, it's a green area. In other cases, it's in this case, it's an industrial area. So neighborhoods have boundaries, and people get that. People understand that their neighborhood is on this side of that industrial area. It doesn't jump over and continue on the other side. So here's a neighborhood in Garland, which has all three types of boundary. To the west, it borders on a kind of a light industrial area. To the east, it borders on open space. And to the south, it borders on a major artery, which divides it from the area to its south. So this, now I don't know, again, I haven't been there. I don't know the name of this neighborhood. I suspect it does have a name, but just looking on the map, you can say this is a neighborhood. And this is a distinct area. And I suspect the people who live in this area get it, that this is a distinct area. It's not simply part of a much larger area that includes the area to the east, the south, and so forth. The second thing, and probably more important in many ways, that distinguishes neighborhoods are identities and associations, because these are things that relate to people's perceptions and what people are doing to try to make connections with the neighborhood. Clearly, one thing we know in suburban America is that a lot of neighborhoods are basically subdivisions that 10, 20, 50, or 70 years ago, some developer acquired a piece of land and developed it as a self-contained entity. And that is very common. Some of those developments have homeowners associations. Some of them have common land, common areas, and common utilities and other facilities that have formal, legal homeowners associations with legal powers. Others have informal associations. Then other neighborhoods may not have a homeowners association as such, but they may have a block watch or a civic association or a neighborhood improvement association. Again, some organization, some entity that gives identity to the neighborhood. Other neighborhoods get identity by other factors. So there may not be Polish or Italian neighborhoods in suburbia, but there may be African-American neighborhoods, there may be Latinx neighborhoods, there may be Asian neighborhoods as, you know, as the area develops. So for example, if we look again at the three cities, notice that there are a few areas, for example, that are very much concentrated Latinx population areas. And it's likely that those areas have a distinct identity for that reason. Other neighborhoods, and again, I have no idea if there are any in this area, may have a distinct identity because of some social or economic factor. They may be people who work at a particular facility. Or it could be in many communities, there may be a neighborhood that has a gay character because of that population. So either way, the most important thing, once you have boundaries, and sometimes even if you don't have formal boundaries like a highway or an open space, is the identity that associations or character, so forth, gives to the neighborhood. Because again, it comes back, ultimately, a neighborhood is first and foremost a social entity. So for example, I pulled this off Plano's website. This shows the networks of associations in Plano. So for example, it shows how many, the purple ones are formal homeowners associations. Now, a homeowners association, and I'll get to this in a little while, is a complicated animal, and it may or may not be a force for building a stronger neighborhood. But you also have voluntary homeowners association, neighborhood associations, crime watches. All of these are voluntary organizations that work to make the neighborhoods potentially stronger if they're strong and effective. So given this, between boundaries and identities, it's a pretty good bet that just about any suburban community has a lot of distinct neighborhoods, and that in most cases, the people who live in those neighborhoods have at least some idea, sometimes a very clear idea, sometimes just a rough one, about that they do in fact live in a neighborhood. So there are four things I would say are most important in terms of building stronger neighborhoods. First, just building more identity and getting people more involved. Getting people involved in a neighborhood is incredibly important. And by building identity, by getting people involved, you build social capital and build the ties that make the neighborhood stronger. So ideally, what you're trying to get into is what they call a virtuous cycle, where engagement and identity build social capital, which builds more identity and engagement. In addition, you want to make your neighborhood a better place to live. So doing things to increase the quality of life and the sense of place. And there can be a lot of different things, anything from mini parks, signs, cleanup activities, competitions for the best garden, and so forth. And lastly, and very importantly, neighborhoods are constantly subject to challenges. Challenges of change, challenges of pressures from local government, from other sources, and so forth. And to be a strong, resilient neighborhood, you have to have that engagement, that social capital. Otherwise, change can be a destructive force. So this requires three different types of people have to be involved in this. Local government has a role, neighborhood organizations have a role, and individual residents have a role. And I'm going to go over rather quickly what some of the things each of the three should be thinking about. The first one, local government can do a huge amount to help build identity for neighborhoods, to support neighborhood-based organizations by whether it's providing training, technical assistance, mini grants, other things like that. Create events and opportunities where people can come together and provide each other with mutual support. And particularly important is that local government has to engage residents in the process by which decisions about neighborhoods are made. And engage, of course, is a fuzzy word, but when I talk about it, it's not just a question of informing people, it's a question of really listening, hearing them out, and making sure that their input is reflected in the ultimate decisions. And then finally, a very important thing local government should be thinking about is an ongoing sort of neighborhood tracking system. I mean, neighborhoods, this is a whole other subject that won't get into detail, but neighborhoods are also housing markets, real estate markets. And one of the things that cities should be looking at, they should be tracking real estate activities. They should be tracking whether are prices stable? Are they going down? Are houses being bought? Who are buying the houses? Are they being bought by homeowners or by investors, which can be an important sign that the neighborhood may be starting to get in trouble? Are there more code violations coming in from some neighborhoods? Are there more, whether or trash violations or nuisance issues and so forth? So municipalities have a real responsibility to keep track of what's happening in neighborhoods and flag potential problems and work with the residents of those neighborhoods to try to solve them. Organizations, whether it's, again, and this is where, some formal homeowners associations tend to be a group of people who manage the responsibilities, whether it's the utilities or the open space or so forth, get the lawns mowed and so forth, but do not engage particularly with the neighborhoods. You have your votes for the boards, but that's about it. So, but organizations have to focus on their neighborhood's identity and have to be reaching out to the residents on an ongoing basis. An organization that becomes a clique of 5 families is not going to build a strong neighborhood. It's got to be a broad-based organization. The second is the organization should identify neighborhood problems or things that the neighborhood needs in the way of improvements, and then organize, whether it's the residents or lobby City Hall or whatever, to get those things to happen. And because being able to make changes that the residents want is one of the most important things you can do. And then the second is to organize activities that bring residents together on a regular basis. Because again, you're talking about trying to build the social capital. And then finally, work with the other neighborhood associations to basically multiply your voice and be heard and make sure issues of shared concern to neighborhoods are reflected in local government policies and actions. And then finally, there are a lot of things that individual residents can be doing. And I think it's important that residents feel that they have a stake in their neighborhood and that they have some responsibility to participate. Now, some people are more outgoing than others. Some people find it very easy to go up to your neighbor and say, hey, you want to help me organize a block party or something? Other people, doing something like that is like having their teeth slowly pulled out. But it's important to make the effort. Get to know your neighbors. When somebody moves into a house in your neighborhood or an apartment, welcome them, reach out to them. I don't know what happened, whether you have welcome wagons in Garland, Plano, or Rowlett. Communities used to have these almost everywhere. They seem to have diminished, but reaching out, welcoming neighbors, bringing over a plate of cookies, just helping each other out. Do you help people? Now, obviously, one big issue which we have up north, which you don't have very much of, is what happens when you have a really serious snowstorm. But there are a lot of issues that come up where people need help, and just keeping an eye out. Would you be willing, if your neighbor is going away for 3 months, would you be willing to keep an eye on their house? Would you be willing to water their plants? Things like that. Get involved in organizing things on your block. Start out by getting to know your block. Who lives on your block? How many of your neighbors do you know? Get involved in the neighborhood association. And then finally, understand the issues that affect your neighborhood and your city, because participating in a neighborhood and participating in the city are really very closely related. And it is critically important, I believe, that citizens be actively engaged in constructive, positive ways, both in their neighborhood and in their city as a whole. Because in the end, people can make a difference, and it's all about people. So I really commend all of you who've come out to spend your Saturday morning talking about neighborhoods rather than sipping coffee or reading the morning paper. And I also want to commend the 3 cities for organizing this event, because ultimately neighborhoods really matter, and your involvement in these neighborhoods really matters. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Mr. Mallach. I see that you've put your email address up there for folks.
Yep.
Please also add that to the chat right quick as well, so people will be able to have that there as well. So as he said, it's all about people. So now is the time for you, the people out there, for your questions that we can then discuss these things. I did see a comment in there. Yes, all of these presentations, we are again recording them, but we will also get the presentations themselves out for general distribution to those who have attended the summit, as well for use in your neighborhoods and in your communities as well. So looking for anyone who may have a question to start our question and answer period. Scanning the groups, looking for hands.
I see one.
All right.
Kathy?
Yes,
Missed it there, so yeah.
thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation. You know, our city has so many different programs that they're offering that do help support our neighborhoods, and it's really been helpful to us. But one of the things that we run into is that, you know, they seem to be, you know, there's specific programs, and if we have a need that falls between those, it's been really hard to sort of get engagement of how do we build flexibility, or how do we integrate that need, especially, you know, I don't know the other neighborhood leaders, you know, like the city owns the email list, but I don't have a way to reach out to know if there's a commonality there. Do you have any recommendations on how we might begin to, you know, like have that feedback loop that you're talking about?
Yeah. I think one thing would be for, you know, the city people who are working on the neighborhood issues to schedule regular meetings with neighborhood associations, basically just to ask, what are the issues? What are the priorities? What are the missing things that you feel your neighborhood needs or lacks? I think that's a really critical piece, because certainly, you know, you can sit in City Hall and design programs, and a lot of them are great programs, but you don't really know what the particular neighborhood needs. I mean, they may have some specific, there might be a specific property that's a real problem, or they may want a particular type of activity that's not on the checklist. So talking to and asking people in the neighborhood on a regular basis, maybe once every, you know, quarter, once every 6 months, and then something, and I think the city of Houston did this many years ago. I don't know if they still do it, but they created a website where if the neighborhood people said, here's our issue, and the city people said, okay, we'll take it on. Then they had a site which listed all of the commitments they made and then their status at each point, so that the people in the neighborhoods could actually go to this website and see where does the plan for fixing the pothole, what's the status of fixing the potholes on Teresa Street? Or when do they expect to take down the big dead tree on the corner of 3rd and 9th? So this was a way of, again, communicating and making sure there was feedback. The other thing I would say, I think cities should encourage neighborhood associations to talk to each other. And even by sharing information about sharing people's email lists, sharing the names and the contact information for the leaders of the different organizations, and even host gatherings of the leadership of the neighborhood association so people can start talking about common ground. I know in a lot of cities that have associations of associations. And a council, I know in Trenton in New Jersey, where I used to work years ago, there was a council of civic associations. And it was a very, very valuable, productive organization, both for the people who were on it and for people in city government. So I think those are just a couple of thoughts.
Okay, next we'll move on to a question that Jan, she's had her hand up for a bit here. Thank you, Jan.
I had a question. How did you get started, or what inspired you to pursue this profession? I mean, what was your neighborhood growing up, and what are your fond memories?
Well, I grew up all over the place, so I moved, and in fact, I grew up in an apartment complex in Tel Aviv, in Israel. And in many respects, but the complex, which I'm guessing had maybe, 50, 60 apartments, not a large part, but was clearly part of a neighborhood and part of, you had a sense of identity there. And you went to a neighborhood school, which I think is really important. And there was a neighborhood shopping area. It's a pretty large neighborhood. But what I became involved in city planning originally, and I was concerned about the fate of cities and how I did a lot of work on housing. But what I found is that, yes, housing is critically important. People, in terms of decent housing, healthy housing, that sort of thing. But the neighborhood that you're part of is perhaps even more important than the actual house that you live in. And I found myself, moving from working specifically on housing, developing affordable housing or planning housing subdivisions or things like that, to thinking about how do neighborhoods work and what makes them what makes a good neighborhood. And in fact, this in turn led, hopefully the book will be out sometime next year, probably, this book that a friend of mine and colleague of mine and I have written on this idea of the good neighborhood. It doesn't have to be perfect. But one thing that also really strikes me is that, a lot of people tend to play down the importance of neighborhoods nowadays. They say, well, we live in virtual worlds, we live in the internet, we have friends, in California and Japan and whatever. But it's funny, neighborhoods still matter. They may not matter as much as they did to, let's say, a Polish immigrant who found himself in New York City 120 years ago, but they still matter a whole lot.
All right, we've got I'm sorry to jump on there, Jan. Sorry about that. Got a question from the chat in there. It's what one specific area should a neighborhood group focus on when first getting started?
It depends on the neighborhood. But it doesn't really matter what it is. I mean, it could be, but it should be something that is specific, something that is meaningful to a lot of the neighbors and something that can be solved without, you know, huge amounts of effort or money or what have you. So it could be cleaning up and beautifying a vacant lot in a corner, or getting a speed bump on a street where people drive too fast and there are a lot of kids. Or it could be getting trees, shade trees planted along a block. Things, so what it is, I think, should come out of what the people in the neighborhoods care about. But it should be something that is specific and something that can be achieved without a lot of money and within a manageable time frame. Because it's important not only to do something that matters for the neighbors, but to demonstrate your credibility in doing that at the same time.
And then there was a bit of a follow-up question with that is, so what happens if neighbors aren't interested in a neighborhood? And so what percentage of interest of the neighbors or the citizens or the residents should be enough to start that neighborhood group?
Okay, you're not going to get everybody to be interested. You're always going to get some curmudgeon who's just not going to be willing to get involved no matter what. And there's no hard and fast number, because part of the idea of starting the group is to start the process going, that it will gradually grow. I would say if you have as few as if there are a dozen people who are willing to sit around in a living room and make the commitment that they will take the initiative to start a neighborhood association and will start reaching out to other people, I think that's probably more than enough. It's a small group that is needed to get the ball rolling. Now, what happens after that is really critical in terms of reaching out to people, getting more people involved and so forth. But you don't need a lot of people to get started.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Scanning the group again to see if there's anybody with a hand on there. Have an invitation from Jan that I think we also all would echo is, come visit us sometime. We are sorry that we weren't able to have you out here in person, but we will again hope to see you someday in the future. Also, I hope that the audience this morning has found this as helpful and useful as I have. I've got a half page of good notes here that I hope that my team has also gathered up some ideas so that we can better provide services to support, engage, and improve the lives and neighbors of our neighbors and our neighborhoods. With that, so I will now turn this back over to Tara, and she'll take it from here. Thank you again, Mr. Mallach.
And thank you, Alex, and thank you, all of you in Garland, Plano, and Rowlett for doing the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mallach.